everyone, and welcome to the Neurodiverse Teacher Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Kristen Eccleston, aka the Neurodiverse Teacher. And today I have a special guest. I have Hamish Hallett with me. Hamish is a podcast host and journalist who is passionate about sharing knowledge and allowing others to do the same. He hosts the In Pursuit of Passion podcast, where he interviews individuals about why they love what they do and what lessons they have learned while pursuing their passion. When Hamish isn't working on his podcast, he writes for the Common Sense Network, a news network that aims to eliminate echo chambers. Before starting his podcast and journalistic journey, Hamish was diagnosed with an auditory processing disorder, a learning difference where your process or information or how you interpret information is different than those without the condition. Hamish is joining us today to share his journey to overcoming adversity and how he embraces being neurodiverse. Welcome, Hamish, to the Neurodiverse Teacher Podcast. We are very excited to have you today.
Oh, what an intro. Thank you so much, Kristen, for allowing me to share my knowledge on your podcast. I really appreciate it. So looking forward to this conversation.
No, absolutely. I'm so excited to have you here to talk with our audience. So I'm going to jump right into it. And what I want you to kind of get to the heart at is, and that's what we're about here at the Neurodiverse Teacher Podcast, is tell me about your younger school years and what having an auditory processing disorder was like for you as a student.
No, really great question to start off. I think for me, the best way to describe it is, lots of ups, but also lots of downs. And I think coming to terms with auditory processing disorder is a long journey. And I think for me, when I first realized I had auditory processing disorder, properly, knowing all the things about, processing information a bit differently, not understanding what's going on in terms of if there's multiple sounds going on. I think it was when I entered, let's say, high school. So around 12, 13 years old, around that, where I realized, okay, I actually have this learning condition, even though I was diagnosed at 6 years old. Before after when I was diagnosed, I had really great support with my primary school and things like that. But when you get into the teenage years, the hormones come out, you see the whole comparison and you see everyone else not struggling in certain things. That's when I kind of realized, okay, I'm a bit different. And at the time, I will be honest with you, I hated being different. I hated having auditory processing disorder. And I remember at night, sometimes wishing to myself, why was I born with this condition? Why me? Why was I chosen? However, weirdly, my mum, who is just my superhero, she's like a superwoman, I'll be honest with you, she kind of had this conversation and said to me in quite blunt terms and in a very caring, but also in a good, honest way that I needed to say, look, Hamish, yes, you have this condition, but unfortunately you can't change it. And you just got to adapt. You've got to find your strategies. You've got to push through these barriers. You've got to become more and more resilient, and you'll find a way. And luckily from that conversation, and even though it was a bit difficult in school, I had times where I didn't get the right support that I wish I had. The school weren't very good. They weren't very understanding. I kind of pushed through that. After that conversation, I realized, actually, Hamish, even though, yes, you might struggle with certain things, you've got so many other strengths that I think the world needs to hear. And so I think is the best way to describe it. It's kind of, the really low self-confidence issues, which, don't get me wrong, I still struggle with today, but I've realized that I've actually got a gift and I've got to share it. That's the best way to describe it.
No, I'm so glad you described it like that, because I do think that many youth who I work with who are neurodiverse in any capacity, the first thing that they tend to do is to want to hide it because they don't want to stand out or be seen different in any type of way from their peers. And I went through that as being ADHD. It sounds like you went through that with auditory processing disorder. And it's interesting because I feel like there are a lot of strengths when you are an individual who is neurodiverse that actually gives you almost an edge. We know there's downfalls to it too, right? Yeah. There's things that make life a little bit harder to you, but there are things that are also, this is a strength and these are my areas of strength or make me kind of unique or special. Do you feel like you were able, through the support of your mom or just in general, able to find those things at a younger age that made you feel unique or special? Did you get to a point where you were willing to be a little bit more open with your peers about what was going on?
Yeah, no, definitely. I think I definitely realized when I had a really good strength was even though you shouldn't do this, which I won't take my advice, we shouldn't do this. I think I I realized like I had the strength of like writing really well through seeing history and doing history at my school. And I realized I did like history at like GCSEs, which is like just like the level below like A levels before you go into like university or college. And I got an A in history GCSE. And that was when I realized, okay, Hamish, you actually can, you've got a strength in writing as a neurodivergent person. And I actually realized I actually was quite creative. I was able to really think outside the box. I was also very, very organized. And compared to everyone else, like everyone else was like, Hamish, how did you get this essay done like 2 days before it was due? Like, how are you not stressed? Because I got everything planned out in my particular way. And that kind of is one of those massive strengths of being neurodiverse, is like having your own sort of like schedule, like your own sort of plan of action of getting things done. Because, oftentimes, even though, yes, unfortunately, the conventional way, if that's the right term for it, doesn't sort of suit our strengths, sometimes it's about figuring out, how do I process this? Like what's my way of doing it? And I luckily found those strategies in place quite early on. And then going to university, I think that has really helped. I think I've realized more and more that I'm actually am capable and I have those strengths in mind. And even doing a bit more research, actually, since putting myself out there on social media this year in particular, I have done more research into the strengths of being neurodivergent, like greater empathy, for example. And I've realized, doing some sort of introspection myself, I've realized, actually, yeah, I am a very caring person, and that is potentially down to my neurodivergency, because I'm always like, I overly apologize so much. My flatmates get so pissed off at me by saying, Hamish, stop apologizing, like stop it. But it's because I care so much, and sometimes it's great to care, but sometimes I care a bit too much. Like there's comes to a point where like, Hamish, right, I get it, you care, but you really shouldn't care this much about it, right? So I think that's something I've realized as well. Like, even though it's great to have that empathy, sometimes it can get a bit too much. And I have mates who said to me, look, stop apologizing, it's fine. So yeah, to kind of like wrap up and like answer your question then, I would say it was definitely, kind of when I started doing like history and started doing the subjects that I was really enjoyed, I was passionate about, that's when I realized my strengths. And also just, this year in particular, doing more research into neurodiversity is when I sort of found those strengths, if that makes sense.
No, that was a great answer. And I'm glad you brought up that whole feeling passionate, because you're right. I do think that is a trait that most anybody who is neurodiverse, it doesn't matter kind of what category you fall into, tend to be extremely empathetic is what I'll kind of give it. And you feel things so deeply. And you're right. I've gotten in trouble before for the amount that I apologize. I had a coach one time tell me that I would start running laps every time I said sorry, but
really?
I mean, it really is right. It's this genuine, deep caring that you have, because you do care how other people feel. And I think sometimes it's the sensitivity that we have because we know what it feels like to almost have to mask or hide parts of us, or not to fully even accept our own selves. And we don't want other people to feel that way. And so we are trying so hard to essentially people please. And it's not until you start to realize that it's kind of part of who you are that you take notice, and you have to, I don't know about you, but like I have to set really strong boundaries, and I have to keep reinforcing them, because I will very much not adhere to my own boundaries for that sake of people pleasing, because I'm so sensitive to people's emotions.
Oh, I totally relate. Totally relate. It's like there's times where like I don't want to have a really uncomfortable conversation because I feel bad for like demanding certain things, because it's even, I would say to some extent it is people pleasing, but it's also sometimes like not knowing your worth, even to that extent as well. Like sometimes I'm like, oh, I am good, but like I'm not that good. Or like some people say to me, I'm so proud of what you've done. I'm like, it's all right. It's like I've done, it's not that big a deal, but actually in the grand scheme of things, it actually is. And I totally relate in terms of, the people pleasing. Like sometimes, it's like I want to demand a certain thing because I know like I am worth it. But unfortunately, like I'm sort of, for some reason, I'm just uncomfortable sometimes having that conversation of just saying, look, I want to have this and I want this to happen, because for some reason I'm like worried they're going to say no. And actually the thing is now, it's like, you know, I've had a lot of no's in the past, but now I've seen the no's actually been quite benefiting. Like, you know, even though, yes, let's say I didn't get into a certain, I don't know, job, for example, or I don't know, let's say I didn't do well in a certain subject. I've actually seen it as, actually, you know what, even though you didn't do very well in that subject, that's just not for you, and that's fine. And I've come into that sort of realization of, you know, realizing, as you said, putting those boundaries in place, letting certain things go, even though our neurodiverse minds finds that really, really difficult. It's trying to like find a strategy to sort of focus on what is important within your life, and having those boundaries in place that are so important. Because, you know, I agree. I think even though I'm saying, oh yeah, I know my boundaries so well, there's still day in, day out, sometimes I still struggle with that. But, you know, it's a constant learning process, which, you know, everyone's still learning about.
No, absolutely. And it's crazy. I almost feel like social media, I mean, there's pluses and minuses to everything in life, right? Yeah. But I feel like social media has almost helped with these realizations, especially for those who are in the neurodiverse community, to be like, oh, this is normal. This is a normal, like, even hearing what you're saying, I'm like, this is very therapeutic for me.
Oh, me too. Oh, tell me about it. It's so true.
Okay.
Yeah.
It almost makes you feel better, because I think a lot of times people who are neurodiverse feel very kind of lonely. Like, we recognize that there's something maybe a little different going on, but then we feel like I must be the only person who is experiencing this difference. So it's almost cathartic and therapeutic to hear other people who are neurodiverse be like, no, I'm dealing with the same thing. But I think for so long, a lot of us didn't talk about being neurodiverse because it had such negative connotations with, I tell people all the time, like autism spectrum disorder, you know, attention deficit disorder, auditory processing disorder. Like, it has such a negative connotation to it, when it's really not a negative thing. It's just a different way. It's just a different way of your brain processing or taking in information. But because of that negativity, I think a lot of us were like, I'm not going to tell anybody that I have this going on, because what will people think of me, type of thing. And now we're getting to break out of that, and we're realizing what some of our strengths are, and that we're not as alone as we've been in the past.
Oh, completely. It's so interesting how you said that, because when I did my first post on saying I have auditory processing disorder, the amount of comments I had saying I had this condition at 5th grade, I had the same feelings of not seeing it as a strength, seeing it as a weakness, and then actually now I embrace it fully. And it's crazy when I saw that, because I was like, wow, I'm actually not the only one here. And it's crazy. I might be taking a position of post it, but I just want to ask, like,
do it.
Did something happen like that as well when you first announced that you had ADHD, or not really?
You know, I was afraid. I think, you know, I didn't even find out I had ADHD until I was 30 years old. I'm almost 38 now. And it's very obvious going back and kind of even looking at my life, looking at report cards, looking at everything, you know, that there was something going on. But little girls didn't have ADHD in the late 80s and early 90s when I was in school. And so, you know, I was just too social or too talkative or a daydreamer. I didn't, you know, if I tried harder, type of thing. And I spent most of school thinking I was really stupid. I really did. I mean, if young me now talked to young me and was like, hey, I have a doctorate from Johns Hopkins, young me would be like, are you like, what? Like, how did that happen? Because I really didn't have a lot of confidence in myself. And I didn't realize that a lot of what I was feeling or dealing with was because I was neurodiverse or because I had ADHD. I just thought like something was wrong with me. And I think I masked a lot of it for many, many years. And it's only been recently, maybe in the last 5 years, that I've really started to do like self-development work to start to realize like, hey, this is me. These are my strengths. Yeah, these are kind of my shortcomings, but I think my strengths outweigh my shortcomings. But what do I need to do to find the things that will help me deal with those shortcomings? What systems do I need to put in place? And I really have started to give other messages to people, because I really do hate the fact that, you know, things like special education or the word disorder are just associated with everything, because I don't think that there's anything wrong with people who are neurodiverse. We are just thinking and looking at the world differently. And that has made us outsiders, when really I think we're the type of people who have the creativity or the intelligence to really do some game-changing things for this world, but we've all kind of stifled it out of this fear of being seen differently. And I'm really hoping things like this conversation or your podcast or things in general will just start to kind of change that concept and idea of people who are neurodiverse, and people will really see the strengths that people that are neurodiverse have.
Oh, completely. It's yeah, as you said, like the word special education needs. I hate the word, hate it. Even people, I mean, for some reason, I don't know why. I've no idea why they even said in the first place. I get like, look, society from whatever decade, 1980s, 1990s, changed all the time, right? Of course it does. But it does baffle my mind a little bit, because it isn't special. It's not like having, I don't know, a scribe or having extra time isn't special at all. It's helping that person, that individual person, leveling up with everyone else who is neurotypical, who don't need those sort of accommodations. That's all. It doesn't, and I feel like both of us, I think, I don't want to like speak for you, and correct me if I'm wrong here, both of us want to normalize neurodiversity. But by using words like special needs, I'm actually interested to hear your thoughts, like superpowers as well. I hear quite a lot. And I used to be like, oh, I'm on the fence about it. But now I've actually got to the point where I was actually think, no, being neurodivergent isn't a superpower. Yes, we've got advantages. I'm not saying we don't. But by saying we've got superpowers and we're special, we start to not normalize neurodivergency. We start to make it extraordinary, where it's actually very ordinary. Like the stats of it, did you know that 15 to 20% of the global population are neurodiverse? That's incredible. Yet we want to use terms that go around extraordinizing. That's not even a word, but make neurodiversity this extraordinary thing, even though it's so common. It's crazy. It's absolutely crazy,
I think it's something that we've done because, the pendulum has been over here and us feeling so bad about us that because I'm guilty for using the superpower thing. And I think what it was is like that attempt. I feel like we're always trying to find middle ground, but sometimes we always end up swinging to the other way. And I do agree with what you're saying. But I think those things have always been things that we're trying to do to try to like really shout out like, hey, actually look at all these really cool things we can do. For so many years, you really kind of crapped on us and said, oh, here's all these problems and things that you're not capable of doing, but here's all the things we're gonna do. So we're trying to like, I think, swing the pendulum, but you're right. There should be common ground. But part of the issue is our school system. There's so many things that are not aligned, I think, with people who are neurodiverse, right? School is not aligned. It's a one size fits all type of box. You have to be, in order to be seen as being smart or being capable, you have to be able to do these certain things. And a lot of kids who are neurodiverse can't do those things. And it's not because they can't do those things. It can't do it that way. It can't be done that way. Like, let them do it this other way, or be creative, or, have more input or hands-on learning. And it would be a completely different story. And I feel like that's where I'm trying to get to. Like, my goal or my thing would be that you would see, okay, this person's neurodiverse. So this one size fits all way that we've set the world up doesn't work for them, but they're just as normal and just as capable as somebody who's neurotypical. They just need to be able to do this path instead of that path type of thing. And that's where I kind of want to get people to thinking about neurodiversity is neurotypical, neurodiverse, super capable individuals, but they just have two different ways of going about their thinking or their processing or how they're doing things. But one shouldn't be seen as, a disorder or an issue over the other. Does that make sense?
Oh, totally makes sense. Yeah, no, it totally does. I completely resonate with that, because I think it is about, it's saying, thinking differently is absolutely fine. There's either way gets the same, destination or the same outcome. It's just, it's a different way of thinking. And I think we've got to embrace thinking differently, because imagine if everyone thought the same. You know how boring that would, but you know how boring that would be. Like
100%.
So boring.
Well, I'll get us back on track. I'm sorry. I kind
Such
of
tangents, right?
But I'm glad we did. I'm really glad we did. And if we do again, I'm cool with that too. But I did want to ask you recently completed a project about auditory processing disorder. And I was really hoping you could share a little bit more with our listeners about that project, and maybe even go in a little bit more in depth about what is auditory processing disorder? What does that look like? What is that when you're experiencing it, for people who may not be aware?
Sure. No, absolutely. So the project is called A Blueprint to Auditory Processing Disorder. And it's like, how does one manage a unknown learning difficulty? I might have got that subtitle wrong, but essentially it's kind of how I wanted the project to be, is essentially if I could go back, like teleport back to my 14-year-old self, as I said in the beginning, who really disliked having this learning difficulty, I would give this blueprint to this person and say, here is auditory processing disorder. You are not alone. Here is XYZ person. If it's, KB, if it's Sarah Cortez, if it's Dr. Sheldon Jacobs, these people have gone through the exact same thing, and it's okay. And, here is the benefits of having a learning difficulty. Here are some of the challenges that you might be going through. If you don't understand, if you're not sure, or you're trying to understand why is the school system like not fully understanding why you have auditory processing disorder or how you think things, it's not the teacher's fault, because it's actually down to a lot of the teachers not being able to, let me rephrase this, teachers not having the actual teaching in place to help teach those with additional needs. And really, it's a whole kind of a blueprint. It's like a map to really help that person who is struggling to come to terms with, which is completely normal, to try and just navigate and understand that having an auditory processing disorder, from diagnosis all the way to dealing with everyday life, is full of loads of challenges, but loads of opportunities as well. That's how I really wanted it to come across like that. And, to go back to your second part of the question with, what is auditory processing disorder? Essentially, for me, the best way I describe it is, we often think, we hear with our ears, but actually we hear with our brains. We often have, let's say, information going through into our ears, and that information goes into something called the auditory cortex. Now, that auditory cortex basically processes what's the meaning, the sound, how loud the pitches of those sort of words. Now, someone like myself with APD, that auditory cortex is there's I don't know how to best describe it, like a malfunction, if that's the best way of saying it, or, it just slightly processes it a bit slower than someone else's auditory cortex that functions, a bit faster, or in a rate that is, common amongst other human beings. That's how I could best describe it. And sometimes when I'm trying to hear people in, let's say, really loud environments, I find it very, very difficult, because oftentimes I'm trying to listen to, let's say, you speaking, but then someone might be having a conversation about, I don't know, what they had for dinner last Friday, and then some random TikTok sound is happening in the background. So my ear's going towards that. Mm-hmm. And then I hear some weird, obnoxious person talking about, I don't know, a terrible day at work, something like that. So if there's multiple sounds going on, I'm just like, I can't deal with this. It's just too much. So I'm trying to concentrate. So sometimes that can happen quite a lot. But I think it's about trying to, find ways to combat that. And I think sometimes going to, let's say, quieter rooms to think about, to try and properly listen to something. I remember being at work recently where I was trying to listen to a Zoom meeting, but there was music playing, and it was just getting so complicated. But as soon as I put my headphones on, I was like, thank God, it's so much easier, And sometimes by the end of the day, sometimes we're so exhausted because we're having to sort of manage so much input as well. And sometimes I come to the realization where sometimes if I put my headphones on and just listen to music or listen to a podcast, it feels so great. Honestly, it just feels, I remember Sarah Cortez actually explaining this when I was interviewing her for the project, saying it was like, it's these sort of cushions around her ears. Her brain was relieved of all the stress, of all so much processing it. And weirdly, I thought at the time I didn't relate to it, because she also said she had an autism or she might have an autism diagnosis too. But the more and more after that conversation, I sort of examined what she said and processed what she said, the more I sort of related to it, So yeah, in a nutshell, really, auditory processing disorder, the blueprint to auditory processing disorder is really this pamphlet for, helping younger me or other young people who, let's say, are struggling to deal with an auditory processing disorder to really understand what it's like. And, auditory processing disorder has so many things to sort of deal with. It's like I was seeing something recently on Instagram where it's like this iceberg where you see on top of the iceberg the visual, me, let's say, processing things a little bit slower, me finding it a bit difficult to sort of distinguish like sounds if there's multiple inputs. Underneath the iceberg, it can be loads of other things like self-doubt, feeling a little bit stupid, or slightly, having a bit of self-confidence issues, So that's, for me, the best way to describe auditory process disorder, but also maybe neurodiversity as well.
No, I think that was a perfect explanation. And I'll say, I don't know that I consider myself somebody who has APD, but I have always thought that when you're neurodiverse, there's kind of, I always think like this Venn diagram in my head, right? And there's always a little bit of bleed through that's coming up, because as you were describing kind of what you've experienced, I'm like, yes, I completely understand what you're saying, because I've had multiple occasions where I'm like at let's say a really loud restaurant or something like that. And I mean, the person can be sitting right in front of me and talking to me. And I usually do the, okay, thing with them. But I've gotten to the point where I've started to be honest with people and be like, I have no idea what you're saying to me, because my brain is trying to process what you're saying to me and the 4 other conversations that I can are in earshot of me. And so all that is happening is just noise at this point. Like, I'm not getting anybody's conversation. I'm not getting what you're saying to me. And I always thought of it more, it's just like my brain is trying to pick up on too many things. And so it just becomes mush. But I literally have no idea what people are saying to me, even though I can hear them talking. It's not a matter of not being able to hear. I can hear them talking. My brain is just not processing it because there's too much going on. And so I don't know if that's what you are saying.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. It's exactly that. It's that constant, it's trying to like process so many different things at once, which can just get too much. It's like, I remember when I was doing my master's in journalism, I remember we do these things like news days, and oftentimes there's a lot of people talking. And I remember just at one point, I felt bad for saying to this guy, look, okay, could you just like stop talking for like 1 second? Kind of just process what this person's saying at first. And afterwards, it goes back to, being quite apologetic. And I said, look, I'm really sorry for doing that. I just had to like process. And he completely understood, which was good. And even quite recently, like sometimes I try, even with like reading stuff on like an email, for example, sometimes I read it, I'm like trying to process what this person's trying to say, because I think oftentimes I take things quite literally. And I think maybe you do it, maybe I don't assume, but I take things very literally. And so if something just does not make sense, I'm like, I literally remember having to type up and be, okay, so do you mean this, this, and this, and this? And said, yeah, exactly. And that's just how that's just how I'm going to process it. And I think in the past, and kind of, and maybe even recently, sometimes I felt like, I don't really want to do this. But then I thought to myself, no, Hamish, it's okay to do that. This person will understand. If you just said to them, look, this is just how I'm going to process things. And if they don't like it, screw them. It's fine. Who cares? If they don't like it, then fine. That's their problem. Like, you can't control how other people think. And the only thing you can control is how you're going to process it, how you're going to react to things. And I think that's the best way to do it. I think it's to try and, say to people, look, this is how I process things, and that's okay. And I think it's coming to that point of finding that strategy to really, process those multiple sounds, or, and just saying, look, I don't understand fully, and that's fine. And if the other person doesn't like it, fine. Who cares?
No, I agree with you. And I was guilty of that for so many years, like messing up or making a mistake and then just not saying anything because I wasn't adhering to what my brain needed. So now I tell people, this is what my brain needs. This is how my brain works. Or given that my brain works this way, can you let me munch on this or process on this? Because I'll have a better answer for you. But you almost have to learn to kind of voice that to people, to let them know that, like, this is how I work. And so I need you to give me that space. And I think it goes back to that people pleasing a little bit in the past. You didn't want to bring it up. You wanted to make it seem like you were like Johnny on the spot, right? But now you realize, like, no, my brain, this is what my brain needs in order to do my best work for you.
Totally. Oh, absolutely. I think it's, it's coming to that realization, and it's definitely, I think for those who are listening, who are in, let's say maybe similar positions than I was, maybe similar position than you were as well, it's a very long process to sometimes get to that point. Absolutely. And I think, my advice would be, to those who are, let's say, struggling, I think trying to find a support network is really, really important, I find, because I feel like, finding those who can really champion you and know what kind of ability you have in yourself and have those strengths, as we've been talking about so far. I think those kind of things have really helped. And it doesn't even have to be like, I think a lot of people think of support network and automatically think family, friends.
Mm-hmm.
It actually doesn't have to be that. It can even be a person that is online. It can be like, I know there's so many people who are neurodivergent, like, Billie Eilish, for example. I know I think has authory processing disorder. I'm not too sure.
She has Tourette's. I know that. So that would
right,
definitely put her in the neurodiverse family.
Yeah. So I know she had, I know she has neurodiversity. And I know quite a few other, celebrities have neurodiversity. And I think, it's, having those kind of people to look up to is a really great way to look and say, okay, I have that support network, even if they're not within your circles. Because I think oftentimes when we hear support network, we think, right, they've got to be immediate family, they've got to be immediate friends. But sometimes it's looking beyond yourself and finding those people around you, So I think, for those who, let's say are struggling to come to terms with it and are, scared and feel worried about saying they're like neurodiverse, sometimes looking up to other people outside of your immediate circle can really help, I would say.
Absolutely. I agree. And this is partially why I started this podcast, is because I wanted some of our younger people to hear kind of the conversations that you and I are having, to know that, like, okay, it's okay for me to be different, that there are strengths that lie in my differences, and I can still be successful. Because oftentimes I think to young kids, especially if it does come out that there is some neurodiversity in school, you get a lot of negative messages, that you get that special education label that we talked about, or that disorder label, or, you don't always have successes in school. And so I think there's a lot of negativity that comes with it. And I wanted youth to specifically hear from other people who are neurodiverse that, no, like, we can still be incredibly successful, and we can still do amazing things. And like, neurodiversity doesn't have to hold you back in any kind of way. It doesn't have to be this negative connotation that you're made to feel when you were younger and in school.
Totally. No, absolutely. I think it's all about, finding, those kind of messages, I think, are so important. And I think, it's also, being honest. I think oftentimes I feel like I had this actually recently on my podcast, a recent guest who, I think her name was Bethan Jepson for In Pursuit of Passion, which I know you wanted to go into, we can go into a bit later. But, she said something so interesting where sometimes, podcasting is about unlocking the truth, which was such a powerful statement. I never even thought about that.
Yeah.
It's like a really good kind of statement. And I think that's what I look at some conversations that I have, if that's on my podcast, but even the conversation I'm having right now, is oftentimes unlocking, that sort of true, like, experience of what those who are neurodivergent have. Because as you've been saying, how, you say it's very therapeutic to listen to me, and it's exactly the same as well. It's so therapeutic to understand, right, I am not the only one, because oftentimes you need a space to allow others to speak about their experience, because by doing that, we start to unlock the truth. We start to actually normalize neurodiversity, So it's beautiful.
Absolutely. And I'm glad you mentioned your podcast, because I did want to ask you about it. It's called The Pursuit of Passion. Can you please share with me a little bit more about your podcast and what listeners can expect to hear if they tune into it?
Yeah. So, In Pursuit of Passion is a podcast all about, essentially how I wanted it to be, is a podcast that's, it's to really showcase really amazing guests who are pursuing what they love to the fullest, despite the ups and despite the downs, despite the challenges they go through, that all of us will go through. Here are examples of people who have gone through it and have pursued. And what we wanted the podcast to be all about is not just, pursuing a particular passion, if that's, self-help, if that's being a teacher, if that's being a chef, but to, like, anything, any passion that you can think of, anything that you love, you can pursue it to the fullest if you really put your mind to it. And what we kind of wanted was to really have key lessons and really practical advice, because I think sometimes, again, maybe you might have the same viewpoint as me, you can also disagree with me here, is sometimes these sort of self-help, personal development podcasts or personal development content can be great, but it's not very practical. And I find that I kind of wanted the podcast to be really quite practical, like really practical steps, really practical lessons that people can apply to whatever they're pursuing, to whatever they love.
Mhm.
And, these guests have been just phenomenal. Like the things they've overcome. Sometimes I, express my story on your podcast or other people's podcasts. And sometimes I look and I hear people speak about their stories on my podcast and think, wow, I thought my story was great. And then they hear you gone, I hear one person got, abducted, and I was like, that's crazy. And then another person, had all the money in the world, but yet he felt depressed and then went on to personal development and became his true self. Someone who set up, Boys Get Sad too, Carl Stanger. His dad suffered depression, and that was the reason for starting up his clothing brand called Boys Get Sad too. It's incredible, and I'm so lucky to be the host, and I think everyone else who listens are incredibly lucky to listen to people. And I know this is going to sound so like egotistical for me to say, but yeah, people are so lucky, and I'm so lucky to listen to these people who have pursued what they love to the fullest, despite the challenges they've gone through. And I think that's what I really want the podcast to be about, is to showcase to people, look, if you are going through some really deep challenges and you're not sure what you love and what you want to pursue, here are these examples that can really inspire you and showcase that there is light down the tunnel and it's okay.
I love that. I think that's a beautiful reason to have a podcast, because I think you and I are very aligned kind of similarly in our missions. It's essentially to help people feel good about who they are and what they're capable of achieving by hearing about other people's challenges or hurdles that they had to overcome, that it gives a little bit of hope. Like, you can do this too. It's possible. So I think that's beautiful what you just shared. And I'm glad that you're out there giving that message. And so let me ask you, I know that you're also a journalist. Does any of this get to bleed into that a little bit? Do you get to share any of these stories through your writing or anything that you publish?
Yeah, so like a lot of what I do as a journalist, allows me to sort of showcase these stories, like writing for the Common Sense Network, which is a news outlet that helps to try and eliminate sort of echo chambers, which I know is a very specific, really niche word. Mm-hmm. Essentially, it's where let's say you're just in a group of people that just agree with you all the time, mm-hmm. and there's no disagreement whatsoever. That is an echo changer, and no one wants to challenge your beliefs. And at Common Sense, we kind of want to sort of, and I'm not trying to say you need to agree with these people, by the way. It's just to challenge your beliefs and think, okay, these are your beliefs, which are completely fine to hold, but have you also considered this? Because by you considering the other side and considering the other point of view, you become a lot more of a holistic person. And I don't want to force people to agree on something else.
Growth mindset. You're pushing for a growth mindset.
I'm trying to push you to grow. And I think that's what I try and do with anything that I do. It's to share knowledge, but to allow others to grow from this knowledge. If that's from me, if that's through the guests, if that's through my writing, whatever it is, it's allow people to grow from it. And I think that's how, to answer your question, that's kind of how my journalism sort of does. Mm-hmm. In a sense, I really, even though, I like to write about politics, I like to write about current affairs, oftentimes I like to write things that are journalistic to really encourage people to grow and to understand something more. If that's unlocking, a crazy issue around disability, if that's unlocking a crazy, rhetoric around, I don't know, let's say accessibility, which isn't good enough, for example, for those who are disabled, or if there's, some cover up that people need to know about, it's to encourage people to grow, to have this really sort of certain beliefs that, not saying there's anything wrong with those beliefs, but it's to encourage them to think more from those beliefs. That's, as you said, I think that's really interesting how you said it's a growth mindset. I actually agree. That comes from it, definitely.
No, I love that. I won't go too far into it, but I do another podcast with an individual, and it's called The Growth Perspective. And that is exactly what we talk about. And it's not this idea that you have to change your mind just because somebody has shared their point of view with you, but you're being open to really thinking about what they're saying and really interested in genuinely kind of transforming your understanding or your knowledge and looking for this, I hadn't thought of it like that way before type of moment. And that's that growth mindset instead of this fixed idea of like, nope, there's only one way to do it and can't change my mind otherwise. And could because sometimes you're missing out on really, expanding what your knowledge base is or how you see the world by not being open to other people's perspectives and stories. So I'm glad you said that. That's kind of one of my own little passion areas of conversation. So I'm glad that there was someone like you out there who is representing that journalistically, because I think that has been missing for a long time in our media. So I'm glad you're out there doing it.
Thank you. Tell me about it.
So let me ask you, we're getting close to the end, but before we go, I still have 2 more questions that I wanted to ask you. And the first one being that if my listeners wanted to learn more about you, more about your work, they wanted to reach out to you in any way, what would be the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So yeah, I would say I'm most active in terms of the social media platforms, would say like Instagram and like TikTok. So my Instagram is Hamish, so Hamish, and then underscore Hallett, Hallett. And then also my TikTok is just Hamish Hallett. There's no underscore there. I kind of want to change that, but that's another conversation, but it doesn't matter. That's like, I would say the best way to sort of contact me through. I would say, yeah, I'm always open. Like my DMs are always open because I'm someone who, I've had messages of people sort of talk about their auditory processing disorder to me. And though I'm going to say right now, like I'm not an expert in terms of like helping, like let's say you think you might have auditory processing disorder. I don't want to say like, yes, you have auditory processing disorder by giving all your symptoms. I'll just say, look, maybe try and like go to like an audiologist and see, and maybe get tested and things like that. Like I'm someone who, can give you my personal experience about how to deal with certain things. But I'm not an expert. So I want to, clarify that as much as possible in that sense. So yeah, you can contact me for those things.
Excellent. All right. And before we go, first off, this has been a wonderful conversation and I'm almost sad for it to end. I feel like I could talk to you for hours about these things. But I do want to ask you before we go, if you could send a message to students or young adults right now that may be struggling academically or socially, maybe they're neurodiverse, maybe they know, maybe they don't know, what message would you just give them as far as encouragement goes?
Remember that whatever you are going through is temporary, not permanent. That I would say is the thing. So I would say if you're feeling, self-doubt, remember this goes and comes and goes. I sometimes look back and think I was not very happy with myself in these years. Then it goes, then it comes back a little bit. But I remember, hold on, I've gone through these periods before. I know how to take on. So I feel like remembering that certain beliefs and certain things that happen to you are only temporary, not permanent, that for me kind of showcase that actually there is light on the other side of the tunnel, basically. So for those who are neurodivergent or neurotypical, yeah, just remember that, it'll be okay. Is the wholehearted message that I want to give to your listeners.
I love it. Well, thank you so much for giving that message. Thank you for joining me today. Thank you for everything that we talked about. I truly, truly appreciate and loved this conversation. So thank you for being a guest on the show. I'd love to have you back anytime.
Oh, appreciate it. Thank you so much for having me on. Really appreciate it.
Excellent. Well, thanks everyone for tuning in.